If you've got $1 million in retirement accounts, you've run into two pieces of advice that flatly contradict each other. One is the old 4% rule, about $40,000 a year on $1 million, safe for 30 years, and about as exciting as it sounds. The other is what you see all over YouTube. Withdraw 7%, even 8%, and diversification will carry you. That's $70,000 plus a year, the retirement you actually pictured. And every time you consider it, the same question shows up. What if I'm wrong and I run out of money at 82? Now, 7% is aggressive, but the real portfolio killer is treating that 7% like a guaranteed paycheck no matter what the market does. The percentage matters, but rigidity matters even more. So what actually lets someone spend 7% and still walk out the other side of a crash with their portfolio intact? There's a specific mechanic behind it, and it comes down to how you picture your money moving, not as one pile you draw down evenly, but as two separate systems working under completely different rules. I'll show you exactly what that looks like, and then we're going to test it against the real 2008 crash, dollar for dollar, so you can see whether it actually survives contact with a real crisis, or just sounds good on paper. Quick disclaimer, this video is for general education, not personalized financial advice. Talk to a licensed advisor before making decisions with your own money. Subscribe if you want more of this, and let's get into it.
The cruise control trap. Over the long run, the S&P 500 has averaged somewhere around 10% a year, sometimes quoted closer to 10 to 12% depending on the period you measure. That number is real. It's also almost useless for year-to-year planning because the market never actually delivers 10% in any given year. It delivers 25% one year and negative 18% the next, and it averages out to 10% over decades. That averaging only works if you're not forced to sell during the bad years. Here's where it turns painful for someone actually living off that money. Picture Linda, 68, retired 2 years ago with exactly $1 million in a mix of index funds through Fidelity. She logs into her account one morning and the number staring back at her isn't $1 million anymore, it's $700,000. Same month, the property tax bill on her house in Ohio comes in around $8,000, and her Medicare supplement premium renewal notice is sitting in the mailbox. The bills don't pause because the market crashed. They never do. Now watch what happens if Linda is committed to the fixed 7% rule. She still needs her $70,000 for the year, but her portfolio isn't $1 million anymore. It's $700,000. That $70,000 withdrawal is no longer 7% of her money. It's exactly 10% of what's left. She's forced to sell shares at the exact moment they're worth the least, locking in losses that a portfolio can genuinely never fully recover from, because you can't unsell shares that are gone. This is what financial planners call sequence of returns risk. The idea that it's not just the average return over your retirement that matters, it's the order those returns show up in. Two people can have the exact same average return over 30 years and end up in completely different places purely because one of them hit a crash in year 2 of retirement and the other hit it in year 22. Think of it like cruise control on a mountain road in the middle of an ice storm. 70 miles an hour isn't inherently dangerous. What's dangerous is refusing to take your foot off the gas when the road conditions have completely changed under you. The number on the speedometer was never really the risk. The refusal to adjust was. So, if a fixed percentage is the problem, the fix isn't always withdraw less. That just puts you back in coupon clipping mode during the years the market's actually handing you gains. The fix is separating your spending into two categories that behave completely differently, the two systems I teased at the top. Let's name them.
The two-engine strategy. Let's put real numbers on this, using a $1 million portfolio, because vague percentages don't help anyone actually build a budget. Engine 1, the core engine, roughly 4%, or $40,000 a year. This is the money that keeps the lights on no matter what the market does. It never gets cut. Not in a good year, not in a terrible one. This covers property tax, Medicare Supplement Plan G or Part D premiums, utilities, groceries, basic transportation, insurance. Stack this alongside your Social Security check, and you've got the financial equivalent of a hull that doesn't take on water regardless of the storm outside. Engine 2, the discretionary sale,
roughly 3% or $30,000 a year. This is quality of life spending. Longer trips, replacing the car, helping a grandchild with tuition, redoing the kitchen. This money exists specifically because you worked your entire life and you're allowed to enjoy it. But it's also the piece that flexes depending on what the market handed you that year. Combined, Engine 1 plus Engine 2 gets you to that full 7%, $70,000 a year, in the years the market cooperates. The entire difference between this and the failed version isn't the percentage, it's that one piece of it is allowed to move and the other one absolutely is not. Now, here's the part that actually makes this work in practice, and it's the part most retirement content skips completely. The 2008 Crash Stress Test. This is where most people get the psychology backwards. Cutting your discretionary spending in a down year doesn't mean you're suddenly poor or that the plan failed. It means you're doing exactly what a good sailor does the second the sky turns dark. You trim the sail before the storm hits the boat broadside, not after. Here's the operating rule in plain terms. Calm seas, the S&P 500 is up or flat for the year. Open the sail all the way. Spend the full $70,000, the full 7%. Take the trip, buy the car. This is what the flexibility was built for. Storm season, the market drops more than roughly 12 to 15% from its recent high. Trim the sail. Engine 2 drops to 1% or even down to 0 for a year or two. Engine 1 stays exactly where it was, $40,000 untouched, because that money was never optional in the first place. Let's run this through an actual historical stress test, because this is the part that separates a real framework from a nice metaphor. The 2008 crisis is about as brutal a test as American retirees have faced in the last 50 years. From its October 2007 peak, the S&P 500 fell roughly 57% by the time it bottomed out in March 2009. That recovery wasn't quick either. It took until early 2013 for the index to climb back above its 2007 high. Now picture two versions of the same retiree, both starting retirement in 2007 with $1 million. Version 1 sticks to the rigid 7%. When the crash hits in 2008 and 2009, she's still pulling $70,000 a year regardless, which means she's selling shares near the bottom of a nearly 60% collapse just to cover that number. Those shares are gone. They don't get to participate when the market eventually recovers because she doesn't own them anymore. Run this forward and she enters the recovery owning far fewer shares, leaving the portfolio permanently weaker and far more vulnerable to running out later in retirement. Version 2 runs the two-engine system. In 2008 and 2009, she trims Engine 2 down to 0 and covers as much of her $40,000 core budget as possible from the cash buffer we'll build in the next chapter. She may still need to sell some investments, but far less than the rigid spender. That means more of her portfolio remains invested when the recovery arrives. She enters the next bull market owning more shares with a stronger account and much better odds of restoring her discretionary spending later. Same crash, same market, same retiree essentially. The only difference is whether the discretionary sail got trimmed for 2 years or left fully open while the ship took on water. There's one more piece that makes trimming the sail actually survivable in year 1 of a crash, instead of a panicked scramble. The safety buffer and checklist. The first few years of retirement are the most dangerous window for sequence of returns risk, because there's no time for the portfolio to recover before you need the money. This is where a cash buffer earns its keep. Set aside 1 to 2 years of Engine 1 spending, somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 on our example portfolio, in something genuinely safe and liquid. Short-term treasury bills, the 3 to 6 month trend, or a high-yield savings account both work well here. The point isn't yield. The point is that this money is sitting there specifically so that if the market drops the week after you retire, you're not forced to sell a single share of your portfolio to cover rent and groceries. You draw from the buffer instead. Let the market do its thing, and refill the buffer once things stabilize. That buffer is what turns "the market crashed and I'm terrified" into "the market crashed and I already planned for this." So here's your 3-step checklist, the one worth screenshotting. 1. Split your annual budget honestly into Engine 1, fixed, non-negotiable, and Engine 2, the spending you can flex. 2. Build a 1 to 2 year safety buffer in T-bills or a high-yield savings account before you ever touch your investment portfolio for daily expenses. 3. Decide now, while the market is calm, that you'll trim Engine 2 the moment things turn stormy, because that decision is a lot harder to make in the middle of a real crash than it is sitting here today. Money was never supposed to be the source of the anxiety keeping you up at night. It's the tool that's supposed to serve the retirement you spent 40 years earning. You're allowed to actually spend it. You just need a system that knows the difference between a good year and a bad one, so you never have to choose between enjoying your life and protecting it. If this framework made sense to you, drop a comment and tell me what withdrawal rate you're currently planning around. I read every one of them. And if you want to go deeper on the pieces that make this whole plan even stronger, hit subscribe, because the next videos are going to cover exactly when to claim Social Security and how Roth IRA conversions fit into all of this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.